Okay, so this is the first time that I have gone on stream to record something that was like fully planned out beforehand, like with an outline and everything. Like I've done videos before where I sort of had a thing that I wanted to talk about in a little bit of a loose plan or just whatever. I got a full outline. Have I written a script? Absolutely not. I'm never gonna write a script. I think I don't know. Maybe if I do some sort of deep research thing or something, I'll write a script. It's counter to the vision that I have for whatever this thing is. Okay, so what I'm talking about today is I have been working towards a unified theory of what the essence of rock music is. One could sort of um and by rock music one could sort of actually extend this out to a lot of just popular music in general since the 1960s. This focus on um, repetitive loops, the worship of the drum kit, um, the sort of like the engagement with the um, like with the with like a dissemination of mediums. But anyway, I'll talk more about this in as I go through as I go through the rest of this. But just keep in mind we're starting with rock, but actually this applies to like EDM, you know, and actually applies to would apply to rap as well. Um, but in a anyway, it's not that it it'll make more sense. So the sort of reference points that I'm working with uh for this theory, I guess the big things that have been in my mind, the first and most obvious one that if you were familiar with this, you will hear it. It colors this entire thing is Haela Hunt-Hendrix and the theory of Transcendental Qabala, and her theory of music that's contained within there. Um, and her theory of music, the history of music that she stages as part of that theory, and also her theory of transcendental black metal. Um, and the different parts of that with the burst beat and general tremolo and special tremolo and the haptic void. Um, and uh, another text that has been of big influence to me recently is Ian Stevonious's book called Supernatural Strategies for Making a Rock and Roll Group, which is really fun book. It purports to be channeled from dead rock stars, and also Paul, because Paul McCartney is not dead, but he traverses the astral plane, and so he's available to give messages, which is I find very funny. It's a very good book. And that plays a big that will show up in here too. If you are familiar with it. Another is Maxwell Foley, who is known online as Reality Spammer. His book Anti-Singularity and his essay Art and Duty play a big part in my thoughts here as well, because he has a big interest in music, and like for him the focus is on contemporary rap music is where his interest lies. Um, but because it's part of the same it's part of the same strain of the same, I don't know, domain. It's the same domain. Anyway, so in order to tease out exactly what we're talking about here with rock, we have to sort of place it in like a historical continuity with previous modes of music creation and previous modes of like attention that were involved with listening to this music and how those relate to um, like social and industrial forms, and how rock stands in like contradistinction to those. Um, so like a musical form is a promise of a particular kind of social bond. This is something that like this in Plato's Republic there is which I read relatively recently. There is this line where like one they talk about which modes would be musical modes would be available to be used in the ideal city, and they say that like the musical modes don't change. Like whenever the musical modes change, there's an entire political upheaval. So there's some sort of link between like musical harmony and like resonance and like social resonance in general. Um, and there's this other idea. So there's this sort of progression that you can identify with the Christian Trinity, from music to philosophy to drama or to art. Um, that is sort of the progression from the Father to the Son to the Holy Spirit, like, um, and or from like the will to the intellect to the imagination. So there's something about music that is connected with like the will, and it sort of precedes thought, like in this will a thought, something about music produces a thought in the same way that art is kind of like an excess over um on top of thought. Um uh or can be, it's anyway, I'm not going to get too into that. But there's something about uh the experience of music that like brings to light, like it sort of is an experience of different relationships to duality. um and you can sort of you can see this in within art and in thought as well, but something about music is much more immediate, um and which goes to the first sort of kind of music that I want to talk about, that corresponds to a first form. So like uh start with religious music that is uh connected with, um for me, I think about, there's a few different aspects of it. The first is it is before our modern tuning system, right? So this is like pure tone music that is connected immediately with mathematics in a specific way. This is something that once again the ancients were very interested in, and the Pythagoreans made a big deal about this. Um, but like, so in math, like, or in music, like if you have a tone, this tone corresponds to a specific frequency, and then if you go up to double that frequency, then this is an octave. um and like there's a series that like a given there's a series of like harmonics that a given tone makes, and then you actually can construct the other tone systems from the harmonics. So like the first harmonic, so that there's the fundamental, and then your first harmonic is an octave, and then your second. So it's like one and then 2x, and you can think about it like a vibrating string. So a string, you cut the string in half. Then you have like that's two, and that's an octave. And then if you cut the string in three, wait, how am I gonna get three? Yeah, if you cut the string in like three, then this is actually gonna be a perfect fifth, and so on and so on. And there's a whole series of these, and you can construct a set of tones based on this, and they're very like, there's something about them that's very pure, that's very cosmic, that's very resonant, and this constructing a system out of these that is set, um, and also like I also associate it with monophony. I like, for example, in Gregorian chant, everyone is singing the same note. Everyone is singing the same note, and you might have like some sort of instrument that is like doing the droning on the fundamental, but everyone is usually singing the same note. Polyphonic music doesn't actually start showing up until like right before the Renaissance, and it's kind of a big deal. Um, and like Indian classical music, for example, generally does not use chords in a similar way. And there's something about this that um, that relates to uh, pre-capitalist social bonds, where there is this kind of immediate unification with like God and nature that's sort of available, but it's also associated with with a like non-democratic, like totalitarian state, right? Because everyone's singing the same thing. It's sort of unified, but also everyone's like singing. There's this like participatory aspect, like when you go to church, it's still like this. Everyone sings, but anyway, and so this is the first mode. In Transcendental Qabala, this is associated with the Cardinal of Assisi. So you start from there, and then there is like a rationalist negation of this. So instead of, the thing about the pure tones is that you can only sort of stay in one key before a lot of weird dissonances start getting introduced, and like and it's a complicated thing. Um, and it also makes like different coordination between different instruments, very difficult. And so this is where the polyphonic aspect starts mattering. But there's this innovation that happens where they move to an equal temperament tuning system. So like instead of these pure math relationships, they sort of like squeeze them in a way that like messes them up a little bit, but allows them to be very regular. And you can associate this with like the first industrial revolution and like rationalization of society and like bureaucracy, right? Where you're creating this ordered system that allows you to like manage time and resources better and just sort of make incremental improvements that are like self-negating. And you can hear this if you really, it's very, very obvious when you listen to like the music of Bach. Bach is, um, there is this playing, these limits have been set. These limits have been set that kind of make things a little bit uglier and a little bit weirder, but it allows you this sort of freedom to kind of go more places and to sort of tell stories and to sort of introduce dissonance and then like clear it up. And it just generates this faith in progress when you hear it. And also like there's this association with like you pay close attention to it, and it's performed by like performers who really like have to know their craft. There's this like elitist aspect of it, but it also is sort of the introduction of market relations start to come in, because and so you have a public that more and more begins to emerge, who is like appreciating music, and like the and this goes along with the increase in craft and the desire for like the self-negating desire ports towards a sort of originality, as opposed to like you go to church, you will sing a lot of the same stuff. And in fact, you go to a church, a lot of the not only you'll have parts that are the same basically every time, right? Because that's not the point, is not novelty. The point is it is this immediate experience. And then um and yeah, yeah, and so and this allows like this a story to be told, and there's this big, it opens up this whole world with like harmony and melody, and like where you can start, there's modulation where you start from one key and then end up in another one. And there's there's just all these possibilities that open up. Um but it requires this like you have to really get in there to sort of start cracking them open. And then there's this thing that like once you've cracked them open, something sort of becomes passe, and then you have to move on to the next thing. And there's this intensification that happens um, with as you move forward within the classical tradition, where there is greater increase in complexity, greater focused on like dissonance, right? So to squeeze everything into the 12 tone system, there's these intervals that sound really bad, that would not sound bad in a system where it was designed to make the intervals sound good, because it didn't have to do that, right? And there's this more focus on bringing them in, and this integration of negative feelings, right? So this integration of the negative within the system that you can sort of think about. Oh my god, I'm getting too into this. I'm getting too into this aspect. Okay. Um classical tradition. This is associated with the Cardinal of Catharsis and the Transcendental Qabala. Um rock is the next negation of this negation, and it involves, so you can associate the classical tradition with reason, the early capitalism, bureaucratic state, first industrial revolution, and like this thermodynamics, because there's like expansion and contraction um, that have to be done to kind of deal with having all this energy and negativity. And then there's the second industrial revolution that is associated with electricity, right? Electricity, electromagnetism, and eventually like relativity. And there's the electrical grid, and there is this sort of eventual spreading out of the global hegemonic power of the United States after World War II. Um, and the prevalence and oversaturation of information, which begins because of advertising, that like this is we start with the printing press, and we end up with now, I'm a VTuber on your screen on YouTube, right? Um, okay, wait, I need to check something real quick. Oh, Moonlit, I'm talking about. I don't know how long your comment was there because I had the script open and it was on top of the. I need to move this to the other side. I had the script open on top of the on top of the chat by accident. I'm talking about the I'm talking about my own theory of what rock music is. This is Oh, I forgot to say at the beginning. I'm trying to form a band. I'm trying to form a band to take the music that I've been experimenting with in writing and be able to play it live. Um, and because there's something about rock music that demands being played live, but I'll get to that later. And so I'm talking. This is essentially a manifesto of my theory of rock music in particular, but I have to talk about my theory of music in general in order to talk about this. Um, so that on this Twitch channel, we talk about philosophy and its relationship to art and music. And so I just talked about two two previous um, modes of music that relate to two previous social and economic forms, like the pre-classical religious music, relating to like the totalitarian state relationship between man and nature, and like pure tones, and then you have the classical music relating to the bureaucratic early capitalist state and like rationality, the Enlightenment, and cataloging of time. And now we're moving on to rock, which is the main subject, which is comes after the Second Industrial Revolution and is associated with electromagnetism. And so the and this is and so this is where I want to. And so this is a big idea that is in supernatural strategies to create a rock group. Is this association of rock bands with gangs, right? So there is like the movement of democratization that happens from uh, the first form of music associated with the thesis, the second associated with catharsis, and this third, which is rock music, which you associate with the cardinal of fervor in Transcendental Qabala. Um, the is like there is an inversion of the outside and the inside that happens, right? So the like classical music and enlightenment reason progressivism is associated with like a gradual integration of the outside to the inside, right? um it's this the Hegelian dialectic where you go outside yourself, and then the subject integrates the object, and then it's a new subject, and this sort of thing. um and but with rock music, it's this worship of the outside, right? And so the form of that like actually catapults rock music to world domination is actually taken from gangs, right? Gangs are like these like alternate centers of, so like the state, if you think about the state as like a monopoly on monopoly of violent force, and like a place that like meaning has to pass through, right? Gang is like an alternate structure of violence and meaning that is outside the state, and specifically outside the state, right? Because it comes to emerge in uh and like there's some sort of like what's oh, there's a word that I like. um there's like a structural affinity. I can't remember the word. There's a structural affinity between gangs and rock groups. Um and the the danger of this is a lot of what lends the danger to rock bands as a form, is that it's essentially it's a gang that one is identifying with, right? And it starts, the form has its nascence in America, but it can't really take over because the middle class are too scared of it until the British bring it over. So we have we have the Fab Four here on the Ed Sullivan Show, to my left. um and the Brits come in and they bring the form to Americans in a way that like is able to sort of get past the screen and make it possible. And there's so the there is one of the things that one of the things that supernatural strategy says, this isn't in my notes, but one of the things supernatural strategy says is that like part of why the Brits had to do it is because like there's something that's like immediately like transsexual, I think is what Eden Stevonious says. There's something that's immediately transsexual about rock, about rock, where it's like this androgynous thing where they're like between men and women. There's like a boyishness to like the Beatles that like stays there even when as they mature. And it's like weird, and then they have to compensate this with like the industries in order to make it more socially acceptable. Compensate this with like groupies and anyway. But notable for me as a transgender. So the essential one of the what I identify as one of the essential features that makes rock music what it is comes from the introduction of the can I point to it within the camera? I can't point to it. That's fine. We got Ringo over here. The drum kit. The introduction of the centralized drum kit creates this effective intensity, just seeing the drum kit being played, the way it resonates in the room, the sheer volume of it, like the amplification that comes. So I need to talk about that too. The centralization of the drum kit creates the beat in this way is something that is very new. It's very new and only works in this specific context. That has been created, and you can associate it with rock music is associated with the machine, like machines in general, right? So how do I put this? Like so there's something about rock that expresses a desire to like merge with the machine, right? You have the rhythmic you have the rhythmic intensity that drives things with the drum kit. You have the amplification through the electric sounds. And then, part of the reason why the Beatles are important is because there's something about rock music that isn't just about the music. It's about, um, uh, oh, I'm glad you find it fun. Yeah, yeah. I think this is interesting stuff. This is cool stuff. So there's something about, rock music that is inseparably connected with the form, like the distribution network that happens with like labels and albums and charts and the public, right? Like the public is involved in classical music, but in rock music it's like inseparable. It becomes inseparable, even though there are bands can start from the outside and there can be these outside groups, which I guess I'll get to in a little bit more in a little bit. But there's something about it's this kind of like eruption of intensity and flux from within a like totalized machine, right? So the Earth has become totalized through United States hegemony, and at the you got to think in the 1960s we've got people in space, right? We've got people in space. So the world has been we have overcome the world in a way. We've got people in space. The United States controls the entire Earth. We have progressed to this state of intensity, and something violent erupts within it, right? And you can see a big focus on rock is this focus on dissonance that was introduced by the 12-tone system, that I mentioned earlier, right? So like I make heavy metal specifically, and I'll talk more about this a bit later, but if you notice, so heavy metal is the real worship of dissonance in a way. So like don't believe what anyone else tells you when they tell you about heavy metal started with like whatever songs in the pre-60s. Heavy metal starts flat out, completely, only, absolutely only, without exception. It's not even really that much worth thinking about. Black Sabbath, Black Sabbath, Black Sabbath. Which is not just me repeating, it's the song on the album by the bands with the same name. they start out by playing the interval is a tritone interval, the devil's interval, the most dissonant interval that's created by the 12-tone system. And it's this and it's big and it's loud and it's one of the things that's really frustrating and weird and difficult about listening to basically any rock recordings before the year, like I don't know, like 1980, um is that they really did not know how to uh they didn't know how to record the sound. Like, you listen to Black Sabbath, Black Sabbath, Black Sabbath, and it sounds kind of weak compared to now, but if you were in person listening to that, they were blasting that. They were blasting that shit. Absolutely. Like, it would have been, their amps weren't as good. It wouldn't have been quite as good as what you got right now, but the experience would have been basically the same, where it's this intensity that shakes you and you feel it in your whole body. And anyway, so just to touch a little bit more on a couple of aspects of the machinicness, right? There's this desire to merge with the machine, which this is a point where um, rock touches EDM in a very obvious way. Like, you go to an EDM show, you are like it's this endless repetition that you are just trying to like close your eyes and enjoy yourself and just merge with as you dance and you feel it and you just become one with it in this particular way that's very interesting because it's very connected to this sort of like later capitalist social form where everyone is dancing in their own way, but they're all dancing to the same thing, but it has this sort of chaotic aspect. It's sort of like, the first form of music. So I said in the beginning, music corresponds to promises of certain social forms, right? Sacred music corresponds to a promise of like immediate communion with God, with nature, with the divine, and with the community around you. Immediate, so the like without mediation. The second corresponds to a promise of like social progress and like human will asserted over the world. Um, the ability to actually change things and learn and grow and make things better and to like this is very human. It's very human. You listen to really good uh like romantic recordings, especially like, oh my god, I love Chopin. I really really love Chopin. Is a really good example. But you can just it's just it really gets you, really gets you. Um, uh, so I'll get to the I'll get okay. I'll come to the escapist point in a second. Um, and so three is and so now it is a promise of merging with the machine, but it's sort of like it's merging with the machine and not in a very like in a particular way where you aren't really like it's not the same thing as like um in the previous mode, like with catharsis, with the classical form, you're paying attention, right? As a you got to think about your experience as a like consumer of the music, as the audience. You are paying attention. It brings you this clarity of attention that is you can is similar to like you want to work in a factory, you need to like do it this particular way, or like you want to achieve something great, you have to study hard, you have to work hard. Like, it's the Protestant work ethic in music is but with fervor there's this like this promise of um freedom that's like a freedom of desire, a freedom that's almost like nihilistic, where there's maybe no utopian ideal involved. It's violence, but it's like it's a sort of hopeful violence where like we can just go insane and it's really fun. It's and so this brings me to sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Okay, so um, this is why I have on my left, on my left, this is Alvin and the Chipmunks. Specifically, this is the cover for Sludgefest, which is Alvin and the Chipmunks on 16 speed. So they took vinyls of Alvin and the Chipmunks. Like, they have Alvin and the Chipmunks. They recorded a bunch of covers of like rock and pop and punk songs. From like the late 70s and early 80s, and someone took the vinyl of that and they slowed it down so that the vocals are at their original pitch, but that means that all the instruments, which were at the sped up pitch for the vocals, are now really like they're down-tuned and slow and big and intense and dark and scary and weird, and it's like all these guys were singing these songs intentionally very slow so they could be sped up. It's sludgy, it's weird, it's great. I recommend Chipmunks on 16 Speed Sludge Fest very highly. But the reason I put this here is because on all the like YouTube videos that have the postings of these Chipmunks on 16 Speed, they're a reflection of what I'm talking about with the essence of rock music in there. A perfect example of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and the icon status as inseparable from what rock music is. So in the comment sections for Alvin and the Chipmunks on 16 Speed Sludgefest videos or whatever, people are writing like fan fictions about like the tragic lives of Alvin and the Chipmunks. Usually the main target is Alvin. Alvin is the one who's like addicted to heroin and like and dies or whatever, and it's these stories, and people like make up a story about like, oh yeah, I remember when I was like 11, I saw them at one of their last shows, and like Alvin threw up on stage, and and they like got into a fight, or like, oh, I my dad saw them back before they were famous, and Theodore was a really good guy, and like he actually like he loaned my dad his amp, um but or something like that. And there's these stories of like tragedy and like violence and downfall, and like there's something about um so the there is so with classical music, there's this, it's associated with reason and the idea that you can integrate the outside in a way that is like positive and progressive and good and advances the world. um the rebellious aspect of rock is that the outside has become like broadcast on TV in the inside, right? These like weird guys from Liverpool are on the TV now, like screaming into the microphone. They're the part of the reasons that they put on the suits is because they're the it's so hard. Rock music has come so far, but these guys are dangerous. These are dangerous guys. You got to remember, this is a gang. This is a gang. Paul, this is a gang. Look at these guys. This is a gang. You have to understand, right? And the but it's this promise that it blows up the social system in a way that is like, the faith is that it's going to be free, it's going to be good. It's like it's the faith of the late 60s that people had, where you what is it, you drop out, turn on, drop out, turn on, tune out, turn on, drop out, whatever. God, I can't remember the guy. It's the summer of love, and also like the May 68. You have to don't forget to associate it with the May 68 uprisings in like France. It's this efflorescence uh of just like libidinal human desire and freedom and like sexual energy, and like it presents, and there's this like almost nihilistic aspect of it, of this like pain and drugs, and like, you have to think about within the Beatles, they're all like I think they like all of them beat their wives, like John Lennon was addicted to heroin, right? They were like, they were probably like going around London being sex pests and stuff, but actually they were mostly busy being gay for each other. But anyway, and speaking of gay, and so there's this queer element. Thank you. There's this queer element that's really important, but it presents finitude. It presents something. It's traumatic, right? Okay, so it's the outside comes into the inside in a way that is like traumatic. There's this idea in uh in Art in Duty, which is an essay I mentioned at the beginning of this, um that like it's the 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 musician violates the audience by with their dark, beautiful, twisted fantasy, like the name of the Kanye album. That this is a violation of the audience, and there's this masochism associated with it, because there's this hope that like through just like intensity and pain, that it will release you from society, right? Because you have to think about the consumer, the social order that these guys are coming around in response to is a very repressive one. The early consumer culture is very conformist. It's they hate minorities, they hate gay people, like they hate women. Like there's this eruption of desire from the outside, and it's this in a way that is like immediate and violent, and is not just the same as kind of gradual integration, because the gradual rational integration was already happening. So like minorities and women were getting hired in the post-war order into the national security state. That this is something that you have to bear in mind, is that the FBI, the CIA, they were bringing the women in. They were the women, minorities, they can be war criminals too. That's the American promise. That's the progressive way. Um and so when I make jokes like that, you have to bear in mind that the one of the critical things is, anyway, this is a bit off track, but the point, each view on the world that these musics point to has something in them that's important and must be like respected and thought in order to make music that is truly aimed toward the future and is able to go against the society. So like I'll get to this in a second, but the rock basically reaches a limit, and then we have to be able to think about how to go past that. So the limit is associated with, I associate with Burzum. We'll come back to that. But even so, we can talk about the. So a little quick aside is we can talk about these different forms of music by looking at the four Beatles. So okay, let me see if I can move these guys. Can I move myself over here and move them over here too, so I can point to them a little bit easier? Yes, 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 perfect. So Paul here, we can associate, well, let's go in order. So we can associate George with ascesis, right? So George is the one who is into Indian classical music. He's the one who's the most spiritual, right? He's bringing in the sacred element, to the art. We have Paul, who is the one who like is the most consistently interested in like songwriting that is about universal themes like love, and he is the one who's writing the most stuff with the kind of he's playing with the chords. He's got this sort of humanist ambition. He's charming. He's and Paul, and then John, you can associate with fervor. He's got the best. He's got some of the best screams. He's the one screaming on like Twist and Shout on their first album. He introduces a lot of the more intense experimental songs like Revolution 9, and he's got the most metal Beatles songs like I Want You, and I think Helter Skelter might be John too. John. And then he's the one who gets addicted to heroin. He's the one who gets together with Yoko, who is avant-garde. Yoko is an avant-garde artist who is part of she's a sort of part of a movement that is sort of following after the 20s Dadaist movement, but in the 60s. So you have to keep in mind. So it's helpful to keep in mind always that there's a bunch of historical things that are happening intertwined together. You can't think about music without history, and you can't think about music without this relationship to the art movements going around. So you can think about, well, and it's more obvious with the Beatles because they're this kind of introduction of high art, and like you look at the cover of Lonely Hearts Club Band and the Warhol, and anyway, but this leaves Ringo. Ringo is more mysterious. Ringo's on the drum kit. What could Ringo point towards? Ringo is sort of an absent center. Ringo is the nothingness himself. Ringo is the sort of human ground around which these other threes kind of revolve. He's sort of this is our Trinity. This is our Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and this is our awousia. This is the essence. What do I mean by this? I'll get back to it. Okay, so Okay. And so this reassertion of the introduction that happens with rock music is this introduction of like violence, um, and in the inversion of the outside and the inside, and like capitalism and U.S. hegemony as a world order, in this sense of rebellion, this sense of the rebellion, violence, drugs. Um, and and it's dangerous, right? It's this thing it's especially, it's a part of why it's so dangerous and terrifying, is that it's a thing that's sort of like it's like this violation of norms that's being forced on everyone at the same time. Like people want it because they are listening to it, but also like it's the same way that like I don't know, you think about the same way that like there's Marvel movie, like I don't know, no, maybe I shouldn't be too specific. Your favorite franchise is gonna get a remake that sucks, and if you really love your franchise, you might go watch it anyway. And even if you didn't go watch it, even if no one you know goes and watches it, they're going to keep making them. There's something that like happens with capitalist society where there's this sort of will that is, be outside of anything that we can comprehend, that is like injecting itself into the world and insisting on things that keep happening and no, even when it seems like no one wants them. Um these sort of ghosts within the machine that keep emerging, and it's terrifying and it's strange and it's very hard to know what to make of it. And 20th century philosophers are really obsessed with thinking about this. But so the Beatles are this dangerous, rebellious sort of outside that is introduced to the whole world and marketed by like, big companies, and on television. They're on television, they're on the TV, they're on the tube, they're on the idiot box, right? And and by the time you watch, I was watching the Get Back documentary, which is this long 6-hour documentary about the making of the Let It Be documentary. That's mostly it's just a lot of footage of the Beatles sitting around having fun, in 1969. I love it. It's great. But in the end of it, they give the rooftop concert and they're interviewing people on the grounds about what they think of the Beatles, and just average people, including like old people, like who seemingly conservative little old Londonites, love the Beatles. They've been accustomed to them over the decade, but there was this dangerousness that was present in the early times. And so there's something very in that, despite the mainstreamness, there's something very strange about that. And there's something very strange about that. And over time, the violence of the outside gets integrated more and more, and there's constant movements within rock where they're attempting to like bring back the intensity and the danger, right? And so you can see this with the history of punk, where you have punk and then hardcore punk and harder core punk or whatever, where there's this like, no, you gotta get realer, you gotta get more intense with it. You gotta make it so intense that they won't put it on the radio, that they don't, no one will deal with it. You gotta insist on the violence. And this happens in the form of pure music itself, with heavy metal, right? Where heavy metal gets more dissonant, it gets more fast, it gets more scary, it gets more loud, it gets more dangerous. You introduce Satanism, violence, like all this, like it brings out the sort of latent elements of like this dangerous gang that's threatening the social order, and brings it to the forefront. And this is also, of course, what happens with rap music, where these, rap music, it's the same. You bring the gang element to the forefront, and the disavowed element becomes the front. But then something happens, and by the time that the 90s rolls around, like the the integration of this outside has sort of become complete, where the danger is sort of neutralized, right? Like by the time Nirvana is on MTV, um, there's like there's not really a threat anymore. There's something about the danger that's kind of gone. It's almost feels like it's a nostalgia for a sort of danger. And the something about that window is closed. And, you know, you can sort of in many ways, it almost feels like it is closed by the end of the 60s anyway. As I mentioned, the old people were already like, oh, the Beatles, I love the Beatles, I love those guys, right? By the Get Back documentary, but especially by then. and so this contributes to an intensity of the nihilism that one is forced to be completely integrated into the corporate structure. And and for me, my personal reference point when I think about this is I think about Lane Staley. I really love Alice in Chains, so I think about Lane Staley and his relationship with heroin, and the Alice in Chains' music specific relation. Alice in Chains' music is very exemplary of this for me, where it's this very deep, depressing, tragic thing where it's this sort of like simultaneous like worship and hatred of like and like self-loathing and like person worship and hatred of like failure and addiction and like um anyway, so this reaches a sort of interesting peak with black metal. um so black metal emerges notably in Europe outside of the center, which is the Brits were sort of coming in from the outside too, but it's a little bit less so. But the Burism, right? So there's this thing that there's this thing that happens in Norway where you have this emergence of a bunch of like they're a bunch of it's very fascinating to me that there are these Nazis, these Nazi murderer like musical geniuses, sort of some of them, are like they're a bunch of like D&D nerds. They're like a bunch of D&D nerds. They're a bunch of D&D Tolkien nerd guys, like Burzum, like the Burzum, the name Burzum, is like it's a word from like I think the Orcish language, one of the languages in Lord of the Rings. It's a word for darkness from like Tolkien, right? Um, and there's this association for them with like fantasy and violence and reactionary politics and paganism, right? Um, and that's very critical. And so in Norway, they're tired of they're stuck on the outside of the United States hegemony world social order that is already by the 90s like well, it gets some new life in the 90s, but like through the 70s and 80s, through the late 60s to the 70s and 80s, the like promise of global prosperity has sort of really died. And in the 80s, they sort of assert an every man for themselves kind of thing with Thatcher and Reagan. And but by the anyway, Norway on the outside, they uh they never had full aspect to the access to the prosperity. But anyway, there's this domination by a foreign power that is espousing Christian values, but also like is violating them left and right with the worship of money, right? And so they say, screw it. Let's go all the way with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Let's take it to its logical endpoint, which is nihilistic worship of violence and a return to pre-Christianity. And this is a very explicit aspect of it in Burzum's fourth album, Varg. There's a song about Jesus's death, where like Jesus's death was like one of the worst events in human history because it like killed the old violent order and introduced this sort of weird order of peace. And you can think about all this through the philosophy of Nietzsche. It's very helpful. But the and so yeah, and so these guys in Norway take this to the end point, and then if you don't know the story, there is the suicide of Dead, who is the part of the original members of Mayhem. He shoots himself, and then there's like a picture that's taken of him that like gets used after he died. That's like used as like a cover for like bootlegs of one of their EPs. And there's this myth that all the band members have to carry like a piece of his skull as a necklace as like part of the bond for the band, and they have like they're doing like rituals, they're doing like satanic rituals in the basement. um and then Varg shows up, who oh my god, Varg shows up. Varg, who is by far the most talented of the early Norwegians, in my opinion. The one with the most vision, the one who is most aware of what they're actually doing, and he's the one who's most dangerous, right? So he's the one who's going around burning churches, and so this is the picture on this is an EP, I think, that comes after Burzum's first album. That is a picture of a church that he burned. So they're burning Christian churches in this assertion of like a violent pagan order, and then one of them like kills a gay guy, and then eventually Varg kills the Euronymous, who is the guitarist who he invents this style of like strumming with big open chords or whatever. Anyway, and then Varg goes to jail. Varg's very they're all Nazis. They're all very bigoted dudes. They're all white supremacists. You know, they're pretty evil guys. But the music is great. Music's great. But anyway, and so this unveils the intense. This is an unveiling of the intense inner core of rock, but also like its limit, right? Its limit where it's come into the system, and the only way that the freedom can really show itself is with like actual real. It has like there's it's at this limit where the only freedom left is like real violence, real pointing toward, and it points towards a new something that go like a completely new social order, like not just playing around within the existing social order in terms of like refinement, like classical music, or rebellion, like uh rock in general, or like not relating to the social order at all and trying to relate directly to God, but sacred music, but like it points towards a possibility. So points towards a possibility for establishing a new social order entirely with music as a kind of soundtrack for it, starting from a small group of people with a spiritual vision, right? So the Burzum's music in particular is actually like it has this ritual spiritual element, and this is something about black metal that is very interesting, is that the it has this sort of contemplative, not quite contemplative, but there's this sort of spiritual element to the droniness and the way that the big chord sounds were with tremolo, where big tremolo picked chords on like over distortion have it's just spiritual. If you've experienced it and you've listened to it, it's spiritual, and it's this a point that Haela-Hendrix makes is a lot, is that this merger between the discrete and the continuous, and sort of like it sounds like string instruments from an orchestra. There's something that's very special about it. Okay, so this brings us to the final point. So what do you do with a rock band as a form, and how do you what is the next horizon of music that we're trying to overcome, that we're using rock as part of a material for, right? Because that's where we started with this. This is my little very very messy rambly manifesto I'm making as I'm trying to form my rock band. So what Haela-Hendrix asserts, and what I believe, and I think that she's right about this, is that the way forward for music has to combine all of the previous mentioned modes. It has to have attempt to relate to God directly, has to integrate, involve the sacred perspective on music. It has to involve the sort of progressive perspective on music and the forms that come with that, with like robust engagement with the tonal system. And for me, that a lot of that is, I really like working with counterpoint, but I'm trying to learn more like how to do more with harmony and in modulation and stuff, and counter. But for me, a lot of it so far has been counterpoint and motifs and development of themes, um, and also a devotion to like really like work to make the music really refined and complex, and like not just surface level, right? Because there's this ability with rock to sort of make stuff that's really good, like that's genuinely quite good music, but is like lower effort, simpler, and there's this move away from simplicity, right? And then to integrate the rock, it's got to be loud. It's got to be loud. It's got to be intense. It's got to be loud. It's got to be intense. It's got to really hit you. It's got to really hit you. You got to feel it. You have to feel it. It has to hit you with that intensity that kind of produces that, the sort of nihilism that comes from rock is because the sound, the intensity, like the being in the middle of this machinic thing, um, it's like feeling the fate that the gods have willed for you, that leaves you in awe, and that creates, and it's one of the reasons that like rock creates this nihilism for the rock artist, but it's also one of the reasons that listening to modern forms of music, rock, rap, um, EDM, is really good at keeping people alive. Like this is something that I don't know. I've had experiences in my life this, and I've especially known a lot of people who for whom being able to listen to intense music, nihilistic, like rock, loud stuff, really helped them through really really dark times because it helps them face this in a way. Um, and helps them keep on somehow. And so it's got to integrate this. And then for me, so it's not only black metal and rock, but I also like I'm trying to have a touch point in, and it's harder to do this for my band because this is live music and I don't know quite how to do this yet. But for my produced music, a touchstone is like modern queer electronic online computer rock because I think this is a live wire for where for music distribution and like icon status in our time. So I'm have in mind in particular Devi McCallion, Ada Rook, Katie Day, uh, and the like. But especially the Devi McCallion and Ada Rook's work together as Black Dresses. Um, but and also Stomach Book is a new a newer one on the field who I think is really really in this vein where there's a lot of like focus on production experimentation. Oh my god, I forgot to completely mention that another influence on this whole thing is there's this document on called Claire Russi is raw dogging it and so am I, about a journalist's experience where she interviewed Clara Russi and like fell in love, and it was this really messy, really wild, intense, messy thing. And she wrote this article about it that's fantastic. That is basically talks a lot about what I'm talking about, the ability for experimental rock music and stuff to like to kind of unlock a sense of flux. And she associates this with being a trans woman and like seeing the whole world as material to trans in like in the most abstract sense. Clara Russi is like a experimental ambient artist who is also trans. And so something about this music I think has to, for me, has to be a touchstone, especially as a trans woman, especially because I think this is where the really really interesting stuff as far as production is happening, um, is with these kinds of people, and this all needs to be tied into. So you have to bring together these three kinds of music, and they have to be oriented towards the mysterious fourth thing, which is a vision of the kingdom of heaven. Um, that or one could say communism, but it is more precise and more helpful to say the kingdom of heaven, that each kinds of music promises a specific social form with a specific kind of freedom, and you are trying to synthesize them to imagine a world where all three of these freedoms are able to coexist in a perichoresis, which is the name for the inner life of the Christian Trinity, who are three separate but also one and together in a bond of love mysteriously, right? This is a thing that philosophy struggles with and can't make sense of. Philosophies all disavowedly, either disavowedly or unintentional or unawarely, are talking about one of the three members of the Trinity, or maybe two, and disavowing the third one and saying that like, oh, they cannot exist in harmony. It's impossible. They can't all be real. Only one of them is real and the others aren't, etc. Right? But you're trying to make music that is an experience of all of these forms of music and freedom combined in a way that unlocks a kind of higher form of consciousness and is a promise towards a new social form. So I started this video by saying that like Plato in the Republic said that like the musical modes, if the musical modes change, the entire society will change with it. And there's this sort of hope, this sort of utopian hope that has been introduced by music in these different forms that I'm trying to work with, where maybe you make this kind of thing, it could a little create a little bit of heaven, or maybe the whole thing of heaven. I don't know. It's very speculative. I know that this is very influenced by Haela Hunt-Hendrix and her music with liturgy, which I know really influenced my life. And of course, I've mentioned other artists here as well. and their different approaches have influenced me a lot too. But she is by far the most the one who has come the closest to integrating these different things, and who is most self-conscious about it, and whose thoughts about it are the most clear. Um, and I'm very interested in her theory, and I want to kind of take that theory and kind of do my own thing from my own personal starting points and my own stuff. And also, then also the music can't stand by itself. This is, I think, a very important aspect, is that you can't just do music. I think you need to do music. You also need to be self-consciously theorizing about that music, not just learning music theory, which I think is important. I think you can't neglect that. But also, like, doing what I'm doing right here and trying to place what your music is within a historical situation that isn't just your immediate influences, but like is a broader world historical perspective about what music is, has been, can be, and like what it does to people. And this is a very early draft of me doing this. I'm sure after a couple of years I'll have much more to say on it. And so that's another thing. You also have to connect it to a real art practice. So I consider this video part of my art practice, although it's also sort of a philosophizing thing. But it has to be connected to like a practice of like visual art, or literature, or like art as light. Like you have to be there has to be action. There has to be some sort of realm of action that's aimed towards the beautiful, that is connected with. Um, because music produces, I said from the beginning, music produces thought, and then thought is like ruptures into art. And so there has to be, you have to have the whole trinity there. You have to have the whole trinity there, because music has, at least music, us, coming from us as limited finite beings, music has limits. And I'm not going to talk about my theory of art yet, because that's even more underdeveloped. But so that has to be connected to this. And so I have my own practice of art, that is engaging in its own way, with different things, that is connected to my music, but is connected to the music but separate from it. But like, this stream opened up with playing one of my songs. Um, anyway, it all integrates. And then also it needs to be connected to genuine, like, um, there's this phrase from Hunt-Hendrix says, like, sacred sacredness as opposed to profane sacredness. So like, I think one has to have an actual real religious practice, in order to be able to make music that is a vision of the kingdom of heaven. You have to be praying, and or meditating, and or like doing something like yoga or tantra, and or especially for me, I think the highest thing is to being partaking in the Eucharist, or other sacraments, but especially the Eucharist to me is tied into all of this. The picture that's in the background is an AI generated sacred icon, abstract sacred icon about the experience of the Eucharist, that I made. Uh, I AI sacred icons is one of the realms of my art. I make art that is not AI as well, but I think that's an interesting thing. So participation in the sacred, so that God can actually nurture what you're doing. Thought, so that you can like reflect on what you're doing and refine it, and be able to transmit it in a form that is not music. And then action that is come out from the music and the art. And then the music itself is sort of, the music resonates. There's this resonant quality of music, like that when you play it, like it gets into people, and it sticks with them in a way that's not quite, that nothing, no other medium can really do, where like it plays in your head over and over, and it's like this repetition, right? So there's this machinic aspect that especially comes with the rock music, where it's like meant to be played over and over and over. And there's this demand, like this almost childishness to, like, the crowds want to hear the same thing over and over and over and over. They want to listen to their same records over and over and buy it and have the merch. And there's this participation in repetition. There's this resonant aspect. There's this, it sticks with you. It sticks and you feel it. Um, Something about that is it's music. Music is special. You got to do music. You got to do music. Music is, oh, I love music. I love music so much. Um, and I guess that's where I'll leave it off. I'll just say I love music so much. Um, I guess if you're already sticking around, I would just end it here if I was just making it for a video. But I guess Moonlit, I guess you're still here. You have any questions? get some water. Oh my goodness. This I'm using a new program for my tracking here, and the mouth tracking is not very good. But like I've got hand tracking now, which I didn't have before, which I kind of like. I like gesticulating. Um, yeah, stay hydrated. It's really funny to see her drinking on the screen. Oh boy. Oh boy. Yeah, Stomach Book. Anyway, I think I already responded to this. Stomach Book's great. Stomach Book. I haven't listened to her latest album yet. Uh, Um, but I need to. I'm very slow at listening to new music or new things in general. Like I haven't played the new Deltarune chapters yet, and I haven't listened to the new Stomach Book album. Second Stomach Book's second album. Her first album. I think Stomach Book is she her. Stomach Book's first album is it's pretty good. But the second album like blew me away. It's like a huge jump in quality, and it's so funny. It's funny. It was very clever to name it Sophomore Slump when it's like a huge step up from the first one in my opinion. Um, the so this band, the idea of sacredness, amazing. What driven me to start? Um, well, I mean, I guess so. I've been making music for a couple of years at this point, with varying levels of like intensity and frequency and self consciousness about what I was doing. Um, and I guess I something about I don't know. I so one I passed a milestone recently where I became able to scream, which is something that I couldn't do before, at least not consistently. Like my EP and my metal that I had made previously, I actually used Eleanor Forte, who is a Eleanor Forte, who is like a Vocaloid, like or she's not Vocaloid, she's from she is what colloquially a Vocaloid, but she is from uh shoot, oh my gosh, synthesizer V. Um, and I used synthesizer V because there was a specific it has it has the best growl function by far, and so I had this actually one of my original music ideas was using Vocaloids in black metal because Vocaloids. I've heard a lot of people try to use Vocaloids for metal, and it's usually for like death metal or like metalcore adjacent stuff, and they sound kind of bad for that because they're so like shrill. They don't have the intensity of like a full throat false chord scream, you know. But and they just sound kind of thin and weird, and like there's something about that that's appealing, and that's part of the appeal of like Vocaloids in general is that they sound kind of weird. Um, but I was like, for black metal, there's perfect. They're so shrill and inhuman and intense. And so I made music with that. But my music was not really, I wanted to be able to scream my own music. I'm very particular about heavy vocals. And I couldn't do this before. And also, my guitar skills needed to evolve and my self-confidence needed to evolve. And also I like moved. But anyway, it was already on my list that one of my goals for this year was to start working towards playing music live. And I hadn't decided if I wanted to try to do like lean into the electronic side of my music and like DJ or something. But once I something clicked and I began to be able to scream consistently, and I had been working already on learning to sing cleanly and sing and play guitar. So once I got to the point where I could play electric guitar and scream, I was like, no, I got to make a band. Like I have to do this for real. And also like I live in San Francisco now, and there's a rock bar that's near me, and so I've been able to go to see live rock shows more consistently than I ever have in my past. And this is it ignited my desire to want to play live. Um, but I guess as far as my desire to integrate all these different things in music, I mean, I guess I have to credit Haela Hunt-Hendrix and her theory for like helping me to put it all together. But I mean, it's really just what I've been exposed to throughout my life. I grew up Roman Catholic, and so I was going to church with a very devout mother. So I was going to church all the time, and I really connected with that specific way of engaging with music. Even as I like lost my faith later on, and became less interested in when I lost my faith before I found it again. Now I'm Christian, but in a different way. But when I lost my faith, I still liked the music. I still liked the sacred music. I like that you go to a place and everyone sings together. It's nice, and especially as I Gregorian chant. I went to high school with monks who did Gregorian chant, and I loved that. There was something very particular about that word. Like I mentioned earlier, it's monophonic. Everyone's singing the same note, and it's within this specific, like a small scale that is designed for the human voice and is sort of like pure tones. Um, there was something about that that was really unique and really special. Um, and and then of course later on after I reconverted, it's not just the musical form itself, but just this desire for music to connect people to God and to like and to hope and love, to to hope, to love, and like a desire to like realize the divine aspect within themselves, and like so hope, love, self-realization, love for the world, and like a hope for heaven, and a hope for heaven that is like avowed. The religious character of it is avowed, right? Because especially among queer people there is this longing for communism that is it's just religion. Like it is religion, it's a religious hope. And there is like a materialist philosophy to Marxism and stuff, and I think that is important to engage with, and it is real, but it has a apocalyptic logic. It's an eschatological logic where you're hoping for um the coming of heaven, but it's through history, right? And I think that in like music that makes this explicit is important, that we're hoping for heaven. We're hoping for a world where like everyone sees God and people's needs are taken care of, and everyone is free to become their best self, and just love, united by love, you know? Um, and and then my and I rock music, especially heavy metal, was very like influential into bringing me into music consciousness in my teen years, and also jazz. So I like learned piano growing up, but I didn't like it because I had bad teachers. Like a lot of the most powerful moments I remember with piano were actually like sitting alone and just like improvising stuff, and not really knowing what I was doing. But I really hated the practice aspect. Part of it was because I had bad teachers, and also my mom was weird about her way she tried to teach me to practice, and also like I don't know, I just had this very childish like lack of understanding about what practicing would produce with music. Like I didn't really grasp how much you had to practice something before you started seeing a result. So it felt like there were just these barriers that I couldn't overcome. And part of this is because my mom overworked me. I had to do too much stuff. I lived on this farm, and anyway, but the but then in my teen years, I got into heavy metal, like Metallica. Metallica, of course. Metallica was my introduction to stuff. Thrash metal in general, Metallica, thrash metal, Megadeth, introduced me to this intensity. And then I've got introduced into black metal. I sort of avoided black metal. Where I got into I went from thrash metal to getting into death metal. The band Death and the band Obituary are very, very important to me, very near and dear to my heart, very special to me. They my vocal stylings are basically like me trying to combine my favorite aspects from Chuck Schuldiner work on Symbolic and the early John Tardy, which I'm not nearly as good as either of them, but that's my goal, right? um and the um and so metal has been a part of my life for a long, long time. And then I got into black metal when I was in college after I became an atheist, and I was very depressed and spending a lot of time alone as an early transition trans woman. And so I really got into the kind of bleakness of black metal. I have these memories of being up late working on projects in college, alone in my room, listening to like Emperor and Cradle of Filth. I really love Cradle of Filth. And like Immortal and stuff. And there is and then only later on did I really get into like learn about Burzum and the real like early history, and that's when it really started fascinating me. And then I sort of had a very important insight, which was like that Burzum's song "Jesus is Todd," Jesus's death is a dance song. It has a 2/4 beat and like this sort of consistent droniness. It's a dance song. And it's got like a dance BPM, and that sort of inspired me to kind of make this fusion between like queer electronic dancey music and heavy metal, my own version of it, because of course this is already a common thing. And so this brings me to another thing, was like black dresses, very, very influential on me. The Oh my god, I love black dresses so much. Oh, it's a shame that those girls hurt each other so much. It's a shame, but their music so fantastic. The what did I miss? Oh, in classical music, I got into classical music more recently. I sort of my earliest memories of being really interested in classical music, like, um, I can sort of trace it back to, when I was learning about jazz. In high school, I played jazz trumpet, and so I started like, oh, you shouldn't ask me questions about myself. I like talking about myself too much. I'm probably gonna cut all this part out of the video, maybe. I don't know. But like learning about how to improvise on jazz trumpet meant that I had to learn, like, actually start learning about how the tonal system worked and how to like play with the rules and break the rules, knowing about different modes and knowing about like harmonies and this sort of thing. Just the minimal aspect of there really started intriguing me. And then I watched the anime Your Lie in April, which I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but like it's about classical music, and it's about how wonderful, like, a mode of human self-expression classical music is, which it's actually pretty silly and ironic that like most of the music is centered around, most of Your Lie in April is centered around the work of Chopin. Um, Chopin is like, he was a pianist who was like an absolute insane virtuoso, but he like would play his songs differently every time. He was constantly improvising, and like the conceit of the anime is that like there's this scandal around if you play Chopin and you like you get 5% different with it. You actually express yourself a little bit, which is, I think they don't make this fully explicit in the show at any point, that like Chopin was a big improviser and like he was just making stuff up as he goes, and he would like, they don't make that explicit in the show. I'm sure that, I feel like the people who made the show, maybe the people who wrote maybe there was an anime and the people who wrote the anime knew it, and the people who made the show did not know this aspect of Chopin, but it's a very weird, obvious thing that is not mentioned in that show. But anyway, it's about how wonderful classical music, especially romantic classical music, is. I play a lot of Chopin in that show. And so that sort of got me interested, and that got me into Chopin, which sort of remained the limit of my interest for a while. And then basically after I found liturgy of the work of Haela Hunt-Hendrix, where she combines black metal and sacred music and classical music, and other things in her own way, um, got me wanted to start actually explicitly getting into classical music. And so I started, I really like Bach, I really like Haydn, I really like the early Schoenberg. um the early Schoenberg is probably going to, over time, as I get better at music, like Verklartenacht is probably going to show itself as a big influence on me. I've love Oh my god, that piece is one of my favorite pieces of all time. um and there's also something about like just learning an instrument that sort of makes one want to learn about classical music, because especially because I started learning piano about a year ago. And the piano has the piano is the tonal system, and like the advent of the piano with the creation of like steel plays into the creation of classical music in the first place. But the piano really, like, something about learning the piano really makes you directly open your brain to the classical music and the possibilities of expression using just the tonal system itself. Um, and so yeah, I started listening to more classical music, and because I wanted to integrate it into my music, I started learning. And so anyway, and that brings me to where I am right now, I guess. um, I get too excited. Well, maybe not too excited. I get really excited. Oh boy, oh boy, I'm running out of energy. I'm running out of energy. I don't know how long I've been going. Ah. Hopefully you got something about this. Maybe, are you a musician? Hopefully this at least inspired you to listen to music in a new way, um, or gave you some perspectives to think about history. History and history, social analysis, material analysis, um, spiritual stuff. It's all connected. It's all connected. Everything is connected, and music is a wonderful place where they all connect. Okie dokie. I guess I'm gonna head out. I'm gonna head out. Goodbye. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for violin would be really cool. I hear violin is a bit difficult to start out, but I guess any instrument is. It definitely be, if you get the, I'd suggest doing it. If you can do it, I'd suggest it. I'd suggest to find a cheap violin and try. I don't know. Music is great. It's powerful. It frees you. Okay, goodbye.